Welcome to masterclass on slings, lanyards and personal anchors. From incredibly versatile to some that you might never use. However, I think that every climber should know their capabilities and, more importantly, limitations. Because maybe you won't use them, but your climbing partner might. And instead of just trusting that he knows what he's doing, it's really good if you can actually double check him and make sure that everything is okay. It's good for your mind. Alright, let's begin with slings. A sling is a loop of webbing which has many applications, like building anchors. You can also use a sling to attach yourself to the anchor. You can wrap slings around trees or rocks to make it as a protection point. Also used in dog bones of the quick draws. This is also technically a sling. Or to make an extendable quick draw. You can also use sling to make a rope holder. For example, if you're rappelling down and you don't want to throw down your ropes because they might get tangled somewhere, you might make this and hang on your harness. And then when you're going down, it's quite easy to pull some of the rope and keep rappelling down. Or you can build an emergency harness out of the slings if you need. So, super versatile piece of gear, which is also very easy to carry. You simply twist it like so. Then clip to the top loop, and it should twist itself like this. And it goes to your harness. Dyneema. You might have heard this Dyneema name before, which is actually a brand name. The material itself is this, which you don't need to remember, but the only reason I'm telling you this, because some manufacturers might list this in their specifications of the product, that it's made out of that instead of Dyneema. There are other brands that are producing similar materials, and for simplicity, I'm gonna call all of that as Dyneema. Dyneema cannot be dyed, so the slings made out of Dyneema are always white. And the red or blue edges that you can see are actually either polyester or nylon fillings. So if you take a sling and it has a lot of white, high chances are it's made out of Dyneema. So what's so special about this Dyneema? Well, it's incredibly strong. In fact, it's 15 times stronger than steel. And that's how this extremely lightweight and skinny, like a dental floss, sling can hold 22 kilonewtons of force. Now, the most important thing to know about Dyneema is that it's super static material. It doesn't stretch at all. So attaching yourself to the anchor with Dyneema sling is exactly the same as attaching yourself with a chain. It's incredibly strong, but incredibly static. If I would be climbing up above such anchor and I would take a fall, chances are I would break something or injure myself. And that's how you should treat any sling. Never create a situation where you have slack in the system, which can shock load during the fall. This is very dangerous. This clip was from DMM, where they dropped 80 kilograms of mass, and that broke a brand new Dyneema sling. Now, some people complained about this DMM test, saying that dropping a rigid mass is not the same as dropping a human body. And yes, a human body would act as a shock absorber, and Petzl did some testing to find out that a human creates about 2 times less force compared to equal weight rigid mass. However, the forces created on such static falls are so big that maybe if the sling is not gonna break, I cannot guarantee about your back. Also, worn out slings tend to lose quite a bit of strength. I'm gonna cover that a little bit later in this video. Plus, your belay loop on the harness is rated at least 15 kilonewtons. So if your sling is not gonna break, maybe your harness will. And that's what happened to my friend. He forgot to unclip his daisy chain, climbed up, and took a 1.5 fall factor fall, which broke his belay loop. And the only reason he was able to tell the story was because his rope was tied into the other two loops on the harness. So the takeaway is, if you're connected only via static equipment, you have to avoid slack in that system. Otherwise, you're risking dangerous shock loads. And that also includes chains of quick draws that I see a lot of people are doing. This is equally dangerous. As a cheaper alternative to Dyneema, you might find slings made out of polyester or nylon. And independently of what material was used to make a sling, all of them must hold at least 22 kilonewtons of force. And 22 kilonewtons, if you're wondering, is for 2 strands. 1 strand will hold half of that. Since nylon or polyester is not as strong as Dyneema, manufacturers simply need to add more material to reach the same ratings. That's why nylon or polyester slings are thicker and heavier. Now, you might have heard that nylon is a stretchy material and much better for absorbing falls. While it's true, don't buy nylon slings and treat them as a dynamic protection. As a general rule of thumb, if your equipment is not a dynamic rope or a shock absorbing device, then treat it as a static protection, independently of what material was used to create it. Slings do come in all different lengths, but the most popular ones are 60 centimeters and 120. 60 centimeter sling is a great length for extendable quick draw, so you can have a 20 centimeters and 60 centimeter sling very easily, while 120 centimeters is great for building an equalized anchor on 2 bolts, which is quite common on bolted multi-pitches. And longer slings might be useful in traditional climbing in cases you need to equalize more than 2 points or wrap around a very big block of rock. You might also find that slings come in different thicknesses, sometimes even for the same brand and the same material. Here I have to remind that independently of what material, how much that material was used in the sling, it has to hold at least 22 kilonewtons. So the only thing you are getting out of the thicker sling is more durability. It's basically gonna last you longer and has a little bit more protection against abrasion. Obviously, this is a soft material and you should avoid sharp edges. And I was always curious how hard it is to cut a sling which is loaded. Oh. Okay, that was actually surprisingly easy. Okay, let's try with this polyester sling. It's super easy to cut it. Oh. Okay, it's actually surprisingly easy to cut a sling under tension. Let's try this thing. Mammut sent me these magic slings. It's slightly different construction. It has Dyneema core and outside abrasion resistant sheath. So it should be technically better for abrasion situations, although I don't know if it makes any difference with the sharp knife. So let's see. Oh yeah, this is much harder to cut. Yeah, so I just cut through the outside and inside. Oh shit. Oh. Okay. That was a bit harder to cut, but the lesson is avoid sharp edges for your soft materials. So, another thing you should avoid is friction between two soft materials. For example, rope against a sling is big no-no. Same goes with rope against another rope or sling against another sling. So let's see if I can cut this red sling with this piece of rope. It's not that easy to cut as I expected. I definitely did a lot of damage. Let's try again. Okay, I managed to melt a piece of my Dyneema sling. Okay, so cutting a sling is not that easy, but I did a lot of damage to it already. Okay, let's try the other way around to see if there is a difference. And that was relatively easy. Wow. And Dyneema is so hot. It's actually, ow, melted a lot. So, avoid soft material versus soft material friction. Ooh, that looks really bad. So, the takeaway from my silly experiments is that Dyneema is very resistant to abrasion, and cutting it purely by friction of the rope seemed to be really hard. However, the sling was still damaged. It started melting, and I wouldn't like to use such sling afterwards. Now, cutting the rope with thin Dyneema sling was surprisingly easy. And when it comes to really sharp objects, when I tried to cut with the knife, pretty much any sling was super easy to cut. Maybe Mammut's magic was a little bit harder to chew through the outside layer, but once the outside layer was damaged, the inside core was super easy to finish. Okay, let's move on. If you tie a knot in a sling, like so, this knot will weaken the sling up to 60%. Now, if you know what you're doing and you know that you're not gonna subject this sling to super heavy loads, this might be totally fine. For example, if you're using your sling in an extended rappel system, because the forces here are very low. Or when you're simply clipped into the anchor. Since I'm not producing any heavy loads here, this is totally fine. However, I should be extra careful to not climb up and create a slack in the system. If I would take a fall factor 1 fall, where I am at the height of the anchor, such fall has a huge chance of breaking the sling. So tying knots do significantly weaken slings, and this applies to any knots. For example, if you want to join two slings, you can do this, and this also weakens the slings by 50%. If you want to join two slings, but you don't want to sacrifice the strength, simply use the carabiner. Now, if you have very long sling and you want to shorten it, instead of tying a knot, you can simply double it. And this almost doubles the strength of the sling as well. If you want to shorten it even more, you can quadruple it, like so, simple. Another problem with knots in slings, especially in skinny Dyneema slings, is that if you load this knot really hard, it's gonna be very hard to untie it. So if you're planning to use a lot of knots in your slings, then maybe using a nylon sling is a better idea, because untying a knot from nylon sling is much easier. Or Mammut's magic sling, which is also much easier to untie, and it doesn't lose as much strength compared to Dyneema slings. Old, worn out slings can lose a lot of strength.
Black diamond sling with a 22 kilonewton MBS. What? What was the MBS on? It's 22 kilonewtons?
Yeah.
And here is another one.
24 kilonewtons. That did not stretch that much. Oh, guess.
Ooh,
Guess.
I saw.
4 kilonewtons. What the fuck, man?
Yep, the sling broke at 4 kilonewtons only. So if you would have such sling on your extended quick draw and take a hard whipper, chances are this sling would break. Climbing gear manufacturers say that if you never use your equipment and just store in a closet under ideal conditions, you should still retire it after 10 years. Now, used soft equipment probably gonna last you between 2 and 5 years depending on the usage. And if you want to know how old your equipment is, you can find a little label with manufacturing date. And that's another reason to not cut these labels. And independently on how old your equipment is, you should periodically check it for obvious damage signs. And if it doesn't give you confidence anymore, just retire it. Your life is worth more than a new piece of equipment. Good, good, good. Now let's look at all different ways to attach yourself to the anchor. The first one is using a sling. Simply hitch your sling to the harness, like so, and use a carabiner to attach yourself. Done. Now what if I want to be attached closer to the anchor? One solution for this is to simply double the sling. Double the sling. I am now closer. Aha, but what if this is too close now? What if I want to be in between of this and what was before? Well, in that case, you would need to tie a knot, like so. But as I mentioned before, knots have a lot of drawbacks. Then some climbers decided to solve adjustability issue by using daisy chains. A daisy chain is basically a big sling with multiple loops in between. And since you can clip any of these loops, it kind of solves adjustability issue. Now, daisy chains are designed to be used in 8 climbing. So if you are not doing 8 climbing, don't buy them. The stitching, which holds individual loops, is rated for only 4 kilonewtons. So if you would clip to a loop of a daisy chain and take a big fall, chances are this stitching would break. And then the next stitching would break, and then you would be stopped by the outside of the sling itself. However, if you make a mistake and clip across 2 loops, like so, now you're actually held only by the stitching. And if you fall and that stitching breaks, you are flying. It's very easy to make a mistake when shortening this thing. For example, if I would clip like so, and I would take a big fall, I would be flying far. Yes, of course, I modified this sling to demonstrate this, but the lesson is if you're not doing 8 climbing, don't buy these things. If you are doing 8 climbing and you don't understand what just happened, then the homework for you is to figure it out. As a better alternative for daisy chains, you can use these chain links, or sometimes they are called personal anchor systems. They are made of multiple interconnected sling loops, and that means that you can clip into any of the loops and shorten it in any way you like, and it's gonna be safe. So for example, if I clipped into the end loop and I decide that it's too long, I can simply clip another loop to shorten it. So personal anchor systems give you quite good adjustability, but compared to a simple sling, they are much bulkier and they will take way more space on your harness. And both slings and personal anchor systems share the same problem. They are completely static, so you should definitely avoid having slack and potentially shock loading them. A classical solution to a shock load problem, which is still commonly used in multi-pitches, is to use a Clove's hitch. So you simply tie. Now I am connected to my anchor with a dynamic rope. So in case of the small fall, I would probably be okay. However, I would still not dare to climb much above the anchor and take a bigger fall. because the length of this rope is super short and probably would not be enough to absorb the full impact of such fall. This hitch is also easy to adjust. You simply pull the belly of the hitch to the desired length and then tighten the other end of the rope, like so. And the other benefit of this is, of course, that you don't need any extra equipment because you always have a rope with you. Well, at least until you need to set up your rappel. In that case, you will need something else because you won't be able to use your rope anymore. Alternatively, there are multiple companies producing adjustable dynamic lanyards, like this one is from Petzl. So you clip yourself, and then the only thing you need to do to adjust it, just simply pull on the tail. If you want to get closer, you pull more. This is super easy to adjust. And if I want to get more away, I need to tilt it. So in terms of shock absorption, this thing is superior to any methods that I talked so far, because during the fall, not only I have a dynamic rope, but this mechanism would also slip until the end, creating even greater shock absorption. However, it is still not okay to climb more than the height of the anchor using this lanyard. So super adjustable dynamic lanyard. One thing that I don't like about these is that they're quite bulky and you always have this extra tail dangling on the side of your harness. So it's just one more thing which can get in the way of your climbing. As a cheaper alternative to Petzl Adjust, some people use this thing, which is called Congo Slyde. So this thing is super cheap. I paid like 7 euros or 8 euros. Well, plus in addition you will need your piece of rope, which can also be quite cheap. But the biggest downside is that it's not so easy to adjust compared to Petzl quick adjust thingy. It's quite okay, but it is not as smooth, especially if you want to go other way around. I find it's quite difficult. But if you're on a budget, this thing could be nice to have. So, personally, when I'm climbing single pitch sport routes, I don't use any of these tethers. Simply because I like to have minimal amount of stuff on my harness when I'm trying something really hard. And to clean a sport route, I usually just use quick draws. I'm gonna show you how to do that in one of the future episodes. Now, if I go on a multi-pitch, I like to take Petzl's Quick Adjust. And one thing to know about them is that there are 3 different versions of it. You have a version of the single adjustable arm, then you have one adjustable arm and one short non-adjustable arm. And this is great for multi-pitching because you can use this to tether yourself and use the short arm for setting up extended rappel. And they also have a version with 2 adjustable arms, but personally I don't find a use for that. Now I wanted to quickly mention that none of these lanyards that I've talked so far in this video are suitable to use in via ferratas, because in via ferratas the falls might be way worse and these things don't have enough shock absorption. So if you go on via ferrata, buy a lanyard which has a dedicated shock absorber. And in general, just don't fall on via ferratas, it's super dangerous anyway. Okay, another a little bit controversial topic, how to correctly attach your tether to your harness. So some experts will say that you need to tie your soft goods always through your tie-in points, like so. However, you might find that others are doing this, where they attach the tether to their belay loop. And for some products like Petzl Adjust, this is the recommended way to attach this lanyard. So here are some points to consider. Normally, tie-in points on the harness are extra reinforced for extra friction with the rope, while belay loop is not. So if you would tie your skinny Dyneema sling to your belay loop and leave it there, never check it and use it a lot, chances are this Dyneema sling over time would make some damage to your belay loop. But personally, since I don't leave my slings permanently attached to my harness, I don't see a problem of having my sling directly on my belay loop, because if there would be any damage, I would probably notice it. Now, if you connect your sling through your tie-in points, the drawback of this is that it squeezes your sensitive parts. It squeezes the tie-in points together, which slightly changes the way you sit in the harness, and I don't really like that. But it's not the big deal, and that's what most of the experts would still recommend doing. So if you want the safest advice, if you're connecting super skinny Dyneema sling, maybe it's better to use tie-in points. Otherwise, I don't see a problem of using a belay loop to attach a sling. And as I mentioned before, always check the manual, because sometimes manufacturers know more than we do. I'm also gonna leave an article in the description which discusses this topic in more details if you're interested to know more. And if you know more reasons why you should use one method over the other, please leave that in the comments. Whoa! I hope you learned a thing or two, because my goal is to publish quality videos here completely for free, so that the next time I go climbing to some remote destination, finding a partner I can trust would be a little bit more easy. And I wanted to say special thank you for Mammut and for everyone who donated me via any methods, because that helps me a lot. And if you want to do that, here is the link. Otherwise, see you in the next video and enjoy climbing!